EO board members, please take your seats. Good morning, everybody. We convene the American EO Management Board to order. Welcome to our last day here. As usual, we have a lot of business to conduct in an hour and a half, so we're going to tee right off and approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, changes, or suggestions? Seeing none, consider the agenda approved. The proceedings from our October 2013 meeting, are there any changes, additions, modifications? Seeing none, consider the proceedings approved. We're going to segue directly into public comment for items that are not on the agenda, and I would like to remind the public that these will be limited to 3 minutes apiece. So first I have Bill Sheldon.
Good morning. My name is Bill Sheldon. I'm an eel buyer from both Maine and South Carolina. And a lot of talk goes on about the Maine glass eel fishery, and I'd like to just give you a quick update on the South Carolina glass eel fishery. There are only 10 fishermen in South Carolina. They're all restricted to fish on one river. Last year, I bought eels from 5 of the 10 fishermen. Two of the other 5 weren't fishing. The other 3 sold to someone else. So I can speak of what I know, the 5 people that I bought eels from. Those 5 fishermen, I bought 3,000 pounds of fingerling eels and 200 pounds of glass eels. And through Addendum 3, it's now illegal to possess or catch or sell fingerlings. So South Carolina, this ban on black boys or fingerlings was a concession that the fishery gave in order to keep the fishery from closing, as I understood it. But the way it's turned out, the state of Maine caught 18,000 pounds of glass eels and around 500 pounds of fingerlings. So the 10 South Carolina fishermen are sacrificing probably 90% of their fishery by not being able to harvest and keep the fingerlings. We don't target the fingerlings. It's just the geography of the river and the amount of current in the river. When you set your fight net to catch glass eels, it fills up with black boys or fingerlings. Now last year that was no problem because we could sell them. And one fisherman in particular caught 1,000 pounds of those, and I bought them all from him. They're not as expensive as the glass eels, but they were worth $100 a pound to him. So he made $100,000 just on the fingerlings. Now, what I'd like to see is the South Carolina people allow the 10 licensed South Carolina fishermen, now that the fingerlings are banned, to at least fish other than the Cooper River, where all 10 men are now restricted to fishing. And I'm hoping in the future the South Carolina people, after looking at the figures of what's taking place on the Cooper River, I don't see any sense of us catching and returning to the river 90% of the harvest when all we'd have to do is go to another river and we wouldn't catch that ratio of fingerlings to glass eels. Every time I approach South Carolina about allowing us to fish other rivers, number one, I did that because I wanted to get to places where there were more glass eels. But now that we can't harvest the fingerlings, it's more important than ever to go to another river. What they always told me was the ASMFC doesn't want us to expand our fishery. So with quotas looming in the future for South Carolina for this next year, I'm just giving the board a heads up that if South Carolina comes and says that we would like to expand our territory that we're allowing the fishermen to fish, that wouldn't necessarily increase the harvest at all. It's still only 10 licensed fishermen, and I'm hoping that the board would see fit to allow South Carolina, in light of the the catch ratio of fingerlings to glass eels would at least allow those 10 South Carolina fishermen to fish elsewhere. And my thought was they could, when they apply for their license, they could indicate, I want to fish the Santee River, or I want to fish Myrtle Beach area. That way the law enforcement would at least know where each of the 10 fishermen are. And one other point I might add is that Maine has had to give up 33% of our catch. South Carolina, through this Addendum 3, it winds up that it's going to be giving up 90% of its current catch. And I'd just like to make the point that if requests are made of this board to give other states or other individuals a quota, I don't think that would be very fair in light of Maine and South Carolina both taking serious cutbacks in their fishery, and for the board to approve additional quota for any one or any state, I just don't feel is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for your clarification, that would be a board action in the Addendum 4, which has not been,
Right.
We're not here today, so
Right.
Thank you for your comments. I've got Mitchell next.
Yep, Mitchell Feigenbaum. I just wanted to inform the Commission of some exciting news. In August of 2014, at the American Fish Society meeting, there's going to be a day or two devoted solely to an international symposium on eels. And although the focus is going to be on the American eel, the symposium is going to include panelists from all over the world updating the scientific community about the status of stocks worldwide. As you recall, in our benchmark stock assessment for eel that was recently completed, in fact, I think it's the very last paragraph of the peer-reviewed document that talks about the fact that at this symposium we're going to have an unprecedented opportunity for Canadian managers to work with U.S. managers to help get a better handle on this fishery and to take steps in the direction of joint management of the fishery. Now, it's been years since we saw the Great Lakes Initiative, the Great Lakes Commission's initiative to try to create a working agreement between the two countries. This commission wrote a letter several years ago endorsing that, but as far as I know, there's really been no formal action taken by either the Canadian or the U.S. government to formalize a relationship between the two countries with regard to the management of eel. What's really happening, and I think it's kind of nice, there's like really an organic movement among the scientific community to forge this alliance, whether or not it has the official backing of government or not. So I understand that our own Kay Taylor is on the steering committee of that symposium, as well as Laura Lee. I'm looking forward to being an active participant at that symposium as well. But if we come back at the spring meeting, perhaps there'll be some motions at that time in which this commission can really endorse the work of that symposium. And I'll just close my remarks by noting this same symposium took place in the early 2000s, and it was the results of that symposium that led the scientists at that meeting to issue what was basically an international declaration of concern regarding eel stocks. And that's what's led to so much of the work that we've been seeing in both countries to just get a better understanding and a tighter management of the fishery. That symposium was given a title, and the title was Eels on the Edge, reflecting the concern of the organizers that the eel might be headed towards an endangered status. I'm happy to report that the symposium this year is being titled Eels Climbing Their Way Back Up the Ladder, ? While that's certainly not suggesting conclusively that the eels have made their comeback, it does reflect the understanding, the recognition, and the mood of the scientific community that that all indications of stock declines at least have been we've clearly have reached a bottom, and as our prior TC chairman said 2 meetings ago, the stocks are clearly rebuilding, although I think the TC feels they'd like to see them building a little faster. Anyway, we have reason for optimism, and I hope that this commission will get behind Kate and Laura's participation in the symposium, and anything else we can do to assert this commission's profile in that form, I think, would be helpful, because ultimately this is the agency, this is the commission that's managing eels in U.S., and therefore it should have one of the more high-profile voices at that symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other names on the sign-up list. Is there anybody else from the public wish to speak on items not on the agenda? Jeffrey Pierce.
Chairman Stockwell, thank you for recognizing me and the American Eel Board. Put a letter on everybody's desk this morning showing FERC licensed dams. This commission has done great work on recognizing that hydroelectric facilities are a threat to all river-directed species. I wanted to thank you for all that hard work you've done, and I hope a lot of this follows through with Addendum 4. If you look at the hydroelectric facilities that are on this map, that's not all the impediments. There are more hydroelectric facilities and non-FERC licensed dams by 29 times the number of all river-directed fishermen put together. And that's a really conservative number. So I ask you, when you look at reductions and stuff, we're just looking for a little more help with having the impediment owners and the non-FERC licensed and FERC licensed dams working with their communities to make it a truly green energy. And I thank you for your time.
Is there anybody else from the public that wishes to speak? Seeing none, our next agenda item is an update on the 2014 Maine Elver fishery management measures. And to refresh everyone's memory, at our fall meeting in Georgia, there was a motion to move to postpone action on draft Addendum 4 until the 2014 spring meeting and task the TC and Stock Assessment Subcommittee to update the landings and key indices through 2013. In the interim, Maine will meet with industry and report back to the board a 25-40% reduction of glass eel catch from the 2013 harvest for the 2014 season, and report back at the winter meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat Kelleher to report out to the board what Maine has done since we all met in Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the update based on the annual meeting. The state of Maine held two open meetings with the Elver industry, as well as having direct meetings with dealers and the harvester organization to discuss the future of the Elver fishery in the state of Maine. After those meetings and after further consultation with our scientific staff, we are moving forward with a hard total allowable catch, a reduction from last year, from the 18,076 pounds that were landed in 2013, and moving forward with a 35% reduction in harvest, which will equate to 11,749 pounds. As I discussed at the meeting in Georgia, we will be monitoring this quota with a new electronic swipe card system. This swipe card system will be one of the first of its kind. It's literally old technology being used for a new purpose. And we are going to be changing the regulations that we've already put in place regarding the swipe card system before these conversations started, from weekly reporting to daily reporting. So the daily reporting will be, all dealers will be required to upload all of this data at 2 p.m. to allow my landing staff to monitor that basically real-time landings data starting that afternoon to correct problems going into the next day. The quota, this quota that I've mentioned, will be broken down into both non-tribal and tribal. The non-tribal harvest will be allocated by individual fishing quotas. The process by which we will use to determine the individual fishing quotas is still being developed, but we are at the very least going to be using a 3-year history. This is the approval of the individual fishing quota needs to come from the legislature. My existing authority allows me to manage fisheries by quota, but not by individual quota. And we are in the process of dealing with the legislature on a myriad of changes in law, including the individual quota, and actually going to move the swipe card system from current regulations that deal with civil penalties into the chapter of law where all of our other ELVR laws reside, making them criminal penalties. So it continues to be a work in progress. The tribal harvester quota, we have 4 federally recognized tribes within the state of Maine: the Penobscots, Passamaquoddies, Maliseets, and Micmacs. And we are in negotiations with all of these tribes at this time to make a determination on what their allocation will be, as well as whether they will use the individual quota system or whether they will fish under a hard tack. Their quota, though, will also be followed and managed with our swipe card system. So that's an important point I don't want to be lost. So we're working cooperatively with the tribes right now. I feel like we've resolved a lot of the issues with the Passamaquoddies that led to some conflicts last year. Those talks continue to move along, and we're very hopeful that we will have success. In any event, success or not, we'll be able to, again, manage that quota closely. The quota will also have buffers within it, and will have payback provisions for the following year. So we're looking at a 10% buffer, shutting down when we reach that. We're looking at a, for anybody that will be fishing under a individual fishing quota, a 5% overage of that quota will mean an automatic loss of license for the following year. And we're in continued negotiations with the legislature for a restitution concept, which seems to have some growing support, where any harvester who overfishes his quota will have to pay restitution equal to the value of the eels caught over and above the individual's quota. So we believe that that will be a very strong deterrent for ensuring people do not go over the quota. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I could be happy to answer any questions, but I do have a motion dealing with conservation equivalency if the time is right.
Why don't you hold the motion, Pat, and see what we have for questions? And I do want to reiterate for the board that this is real. There are a lot of balls still in the air, and underscore this is a work in progress. So, Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Pat, understanding that you're dealing with the legislature and having been involved in the legislature, I was wondering if you have any idea about the probability of passage of all your suggestions and what the timetable might be. Will you have laws in effect for this season? Probably Walter, Representative, could answer.
I'd like to turn to Representative Walter Kamiga, who's co-chair of our Marine Resource Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. We have a workshop on we've had a public hearing on the bill. We've had one work session on it. We have another one this next Wednesday. I think the bill is largely taken shape, and I don't see any problems, but you know the process. But I feel pretty good about getting it wrapped up for the most part. on the 12th, and it's got an emergency preamble, so it would take effect as soon as it's signed. So I think we've worked out most of the enabling the legislation to enable this plan.
Follow-up, Pat?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that if the legislature cannot come to more than two-thirds of consensus and it does not pass under an emergency, we would be in a situation of status quo regarding state laws, penalties, and other issues associated with the fishery. That said, though, I will still be able to put in place the quota, just would not be able to manage it on an individual basis. So the swipe card system would still be used. We put the swipe card in place under regulation to ensure that we would have it in place in case the legislature was not able to, we were not able to pass it by two-thirds with the emergency preamble. So even with the legislature failing to be able to act, we feel comfortable that we can manage the quota in a way that we'll not go over. And in doing so, what we refer to in the department is Plan B, where we would take emergency action, take many additional days out of the fishery to slow it down, to monitor the quota, probably take fishing areas out of play, including taking sides of the rivers, only allowing fishing on one side of the river, and using those type of input controls to slow the fishery down while we monitor catch.
Pat?
Great report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, a question would be, could you clarify again how you would deal with a tribal group in the case you just explained? I understand the non-tribal, but could you clarify it just a little bit?
Sure. So, as sovereign governments, we are meeting with them on an individual basis. We do track the catch, Pat, by license type. So we have, out of the 18,000 pounds that we reported for 2013, 2,500 pounds were landed by the tribes. So we've broken that out by tribe and are negotiating with them right now on what their quota will be going into the next fishing season.
Thank you.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, can you just briefly review the penalty provisions that the state has enacted to address illegal harvest?
Sure. So, on all penalties are now criminal. So that gives us the ability to have arrest powers on the river and deal directly with the illegal activity as far as non-licensed fishermen. That still remains our biggest problem. The lure of the quick buck is still there. I'd looked to the Colonel. I believe we had in-state roughly 200 summonses last year for fishing without a license, and we were able to successfully prosecute the majority of those, with the exception of the tribal issues because of a notice issue that was raised by the district attorneys. On the licensed harvester side, we have a 2 strikes and you're out rule. It is also criminal. So any fishing in closed areas, fishing on closed days, all of those issues or all those penalties would be criminal. I will say, though, because we have a 2 strikes and you lose lifetime privileges, the compliance rate among licensed fishermen has suddenly skyrocketed because nobody wants to lose their license. So we feel very good that we're in a very good place with the licensed fishermen. Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, the reason we want to go in the direction of an individual fishing quota is because we believe it will be beneficial to the states to the south to help slow down, it will never eliminate it, but slow down the illegal harvest from the other states. We think the idea of an individual fisherman having 20 pounds and wanting to make as much money on that 20 pounds as he can is much less likely to receive eels and want to sell eels that have been illegally taken from another jurisdiction or, frankly, from the state. So we believe that'll be very beneficial.
Paul?
And I thank you, too, for that report, Pat. I just wanted to ask about that 11,000-plus pound quota. I'm having trouble putting it in context to what your historic landings have been like over the past 5 or 6 years. You mentioned the 2013 landings. I don't know if Kate has a table or something that we can take a look at, but so I'm wondering, how does that relate to your most recent past in terms of landings, and how did you determine that reduction was the place to be?
Yeah. We're envisioning this, Paul, as literally probably a two-step reduction, knowing that there will be additional actions taken by this board. Last year, I harvested the 18,000. The year before, we were at 20,000, which was close to our all-time high. And the year before that, we were at 8,000 pounds. I would say, on average, we fluctuate historically between 8 to 10 or 11,000, but I'm going by memory here. Is that our landings? Yeah. So if you can see by that chart, you can see those lows are usually reflecting either incredibly bad weather years, and they're usually associated with a very, very bad price. So those landings are driven by high points in price. So that's when the landings go up, that's when all the license holders activate, and that was definitely true for 2012 and 2013.
Are there other questions? Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend the state of Maine for taking all the actions they've taken, and certainly we hope that lessens some of the law enforcement issues that we've had, and it sounds like it should help quite a lot. But I also want to make sure that we keep in mind the level that the technical committee recommended for a maximum amount of harvest, and that we still have quite a long ways to go to get the harvest down to, in that, towards that level. So, thank you.
Tom?
Yeah, I appreciate Paul's question. I was looking for the same information. I think it's likely that in May the board's going to go back and start discussing again what the yellow eel regulations should be in setting quotas, and I know that there's been a good intent to reduce landings, reduce our landings to a lower level than the stock assessment period. And just want to point out where we're ending up with glass eels, because we're going to have a very important discussion in May about setting limits for yellow eel. Thanks.
Lewis?
Yeah, I too was very impressed with the approach that Maine has taken on this. I'm intrigued with the swipe card proposal, and would be very interested in getting more information on that in the future if it gets implemented, and wish you success in your legislature. I just think we need to make sure that when we're reviewing this in the future, I think we need some metadata associated with these landings, because I'm intrigued by the expected extreme variability in annual recruitment, and how those landings may be influenced by your class strength, but also significant weather events, as well as the price. So it would be interesting to look at how those landings vacillate with those variables associated as well. So I think that might give us a little better view, because it's not surprising to me the fluctuation in the landings, but very nicely done by the state of Maine, in my opinion.
Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I likewise want to commend Maine for the report and the initiatives. In particular, I wanted to speak in support of the restitution initiative that I believe you mentioned. Certainly, we've seen that all across the United States with a variety of species, not the least of which our own Pennsylvania Game Commission is asserting itself in relationship to elk and trophy white-tailed deer, and very successfully thereof. So thank you.
Other questions for Pat? Seeing none, you have a motion, Pat.
We asked Kate to take the concept of a conservation equivalency to the technical committee to discuss a change to allow us to have a little bit more flexibility with our negotiations with the tribe. And I would move the acceptance of a 2014 conservation equivalency request to allow the state of Maine to suspend the use of input controls currently used, which include license and gear caps, to manage the glass eel harvest, and move to the use of an output control or a total allowable catch provision with buffer and payback provisions. And I believe Kate has that for the...
Is there a second to this motion? Second by Pat Augustine.
And I'd like on the record, Mr. Chairman, to say for discussion purposes, I want to hear more about it. It sounds intriguing.
Okay. Get it up on the board. Okay, before I go to the board, I'd like to turn to Sheila for comments from the TC.
Can we bring that back up? All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The TC did review the proposal from Maine for the Elver harvest for 2014, and we are very supportive of the quota management process that they have proposed, and we are encouraged by the enforcement measures that are going to be put in place. We think that's very useful and will be useful in the future. The only thing the TC did want to point out, and it's something that Mr. White also pointed out, is that based on the stock assessment information that we had that was completed with data through 2010, the level of harvest that is being currently proposed for Maine is about twice as much as what was the average for the landings in the years that were used for the stock assessment. So it is significantly higher yet than what we had evaluated. So I just want to point that out from the technical committee perspective.
Thank you, Sheila. Comments, questions? Pat, you have follow-up, and then we'll go right around the table.
I just want to reiterate that all of my conversations with the industry to date have, I've made sure to make it very clear that this is going to be a two-step reduction process, that this is the state harvesters should not anticipate that this board will just stop here as far as reductions. So that's, I think, just, and again, important to note.
And it's within the range that was approved by the board at our meeting. Richie, Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I don't quite understand the need for this. Does this board control the method of harvest?
Pat?
Thanks, Richie. The current fisheries management plan in place dictates the number of licenses as well as the number of pieces of gear. There will be no change from the state license side to increase licenses or gear type. The flexibility I'm looking for is to deal specifically with the Maine tribes, and the conversations that we're having specifically with the Passamaquoddies are dealing directly with the use, an expanded use of one gear type. So they would like to expand their licenses as well as shifting over to a dip net only fishery. So right now, I don't have the flexibility to do that because of the provisions that are in place.
Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the motion, why is it necessary, Pat, for us to suspend the use of input controls? Why couldn't we just add what you want to in the second part of the motion?
Pat?
Because I don't know what those numbers are yet. And honestly, I'm just looking for the flexibility. The conversations that we're having with the Passamaquoddies are to go to unlimited dipnet licenses. They issued 575 licenses, which included a very large number of fight nets within the fishery last year. We don't expect that number to jump much beyond the 575. But in order to ensure we don't end up clogging the rivers with a tremendous amount of fixed gear, we came to a provisional agreement that they would switch to dip net only.
Walter.
There's a representative from the Passamaquoddy tribe here, if the board would like to hear his perspective on the... his name's Corey Hinton.
Want to stay, Corey? Before we go to you, let's go. We'll take questions from the board. Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, I wonder if you could give us an idea of what you're thinking about when you said that this is the first step in the process. What type or what level of reduction are you thinking about for the second step of the process? Thank you.
Pat.
Thanks, Roy. I think it's recognized by the state of Maine that through the addendum process, this board will move to take action to, based on the technical committee's advice, to lower the quota for the glass eel harvest within the state of Maine and likely South Carolina, among many other things. I think the reason we at the last meeting asked for a delay was to ensure that we could include as much new information that would be available to help guide the technical committee's advice before we got there. So when I say there's a step-down approach, I am definitely referring to the addendum process that we'll be moving forward with.
Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in that same neighborhood in the stepwise process here, and I just couldn't recall exactly from the previous meeting whether 5,000, a little over 5,000, 5,233 was the recommendation of the technical committee, and I know that's through 2010, but throughout the day I think the idea of what the technical committee has said many times, no additional harvest, was where an assessment was done through 2010. So I think it's encouraging to hear there will be a step down at some point, and I guess the details of how that occurs really have to be unveiled. I think what Lewis had to say about the metadata clearly includes some price elements that Pat mentioned, so I'm not sure how we look at that as well and how difficult that might be for Maine in the future given the trend from 2012 and 13 compared to 2011 even, which was about 8,500 pounds. So, you know, again, I think a lot of us have centered on the same idea.
Other comments? David.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, in regard to the payback provisions, the way you characterized it, at least my understanding was the individual's whole responsibility to pay back any overages, and how is it being how do you characterize that in terms of the state? And I'll give you an example. Let's say the state went over the allocation that's being discussed by 2,000 pounds due to illegal activity. if that was subsequently discovered, would the state also incur a payback for that type of activity?
We, right now, because right now, we believe all illegal eels are being captured through the dealer reporting. The dealer reporting, that 18,000 pounds, shows a difference, that we show a difference of nearly 4,000 pounds between harvester and dealer. Now, a lot of that's because of non-reporting and other issues that we're having from the harvester side, and it's another one of the reasons that we're moving forward with the swipe card system. The payback provision, as we see it, would be just that. Well, let me back up, Dave. With the understanding that we're going to go to a step down, wherever we ended up for the following year, we believe that the reduction would need to be made, and then the overage would have to come from that moving forward. If it is found through law enforcement activities or other means that we did not capture a significant amount of elvers related to the state of Maine, I think we would have to be open to a discussion of how we would resolve that. We do take it very seriously as far as the enforcement issues associated with this. That is, I hope to everybody, evident to everybody, that the law changes we've made shows that we're very serious about this. And I think anything that would not be captured through any of our reporting, I'd be open for a discussion on how to try to resolve it.
Thank you.
Are there any further comments from the board? Seeing none, Corey.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you very much to Representative Kumiga for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Passamaquoddy tribe. My name is Corey Hinton. I am a Passamaquoddy citizen and the representative who's been asked to speak on behalf of the tribe here this morning. I would like to say that the motion, which is generally asking for flexibility to move from an input to an output structure of management, is something that the tribe adopted in the 2013 season. Last year we adopted a total allowable catch of 3,600 pounds. And we believe that at that time, based on the science that we had and the combination of that science with our traditional knowledge, that an output system, and quite frankly measuring what's coming out of the river versus what is going into the river as far as gear and the number of people, is a more efficient way of ensuring protection of the resource. So we're encouraged to see that this body continues to move towards an output structure. This motion appears to be a definite step in that direction, and we hope that the addendums that are being considered and will move along over the next few months will continue to move in that direction. As we've implemented our plan on a tribal level, we've done so under the authority of our reserved treaty fishing rights that were initially recognized going back to the 17th and 18th century, and were subsequently recognized in Congress. And it's through that inherent sovereignty that we have continued to manage our fishery in a sustainable way and made the policy decision to move towards an output structure, as we've discussed here today. And I would also like to thank Commissioner Kelleher and the state of Maine for the ongoing productive and good faith negotiations that we've been in. I've been in several of these meetings, and I understand how difficult some of these issues are that we're grappling with. And I recognize that in the state of Maine, the pressure is particularly acute. And I think that the commissioner deserves a lot of credit for balancing, quite frankly, some difficult pressures coming from a few different angles. We've continued our discussions as recently as yesterday afternoon, and we are, I think, really on the cusp of what will be a tremendous accomplishment as far as instilling and ensuring productive and robust management measures, but also as far as setting a precedent for positive tribal-state relations as it relates to resource management. Another thing that I'd like to touch on while I have the floor is the technical committee. When I last spoke before this body, I believe it was in the spring meeting of 2013, there was a recommendation made by several members that there be Passamaquoddy representation in some capacity with this board, perhaps not on the advisory level, but maybe on the technical committee level. I'd like to say that we've continued those discussions with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that although we obviously have some other issues to deal with in the immediate, we look forward to submitting a resume and a possible candidate to sit on that technical committee to lend an indigenous-based perspective to the policy recommendations that this body considers. So with that, I'd again just like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here today. I'd like to thank all of you for your continued work to protect this resource, which is so incredibly important to the Passamaquoddy people. Thank you.
Thank you. Or is there anybody else from the audience who would like to speak to the motion on the board? Okay, coming back to the board, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm supportive of the motion, but I have a couple of questions that are technical in nature. The first, through you to Kate, does the addendum allow for conservation equivalency requests, such as the one being offered today by the state of Maine?
Yes, the FMP does allow for conservation equivalency requests.
Thank you for that. So then my follow-up is, should the motion be framed in that context, that this is a request for conservation equivalency by the state of Maine? It may be unnecessary, but as I look at this and I see as presented today, it doesn't seem to really provide the context that we might benefit from down the road as we look back on the action that we seem about to take. Thank you.
Paul, did I see your hand up?
Just a question about procedure. So if this motion, once this action is taken on this motion, will there be a follow-up motion to discuss the quota proposal that Maine has presented? Or I'm trying to recall where we left off the discussion at our annual meeting and what type of actions we're expected to take today relative to Maine's 2014 fishery. I know that this sets the administrative procedures that you need to move forward, but we still have the details of the quota itself.
Well, I'd be looking to Bob for guidance here about the motion that was made and adopted by the board at the October meeting, was that Maine would report back to the board a reduction between 25 and 40%, and this 35% reduction is within that range. So my sense is that we don't need further board action, but I'm going to double dot my I's and consult with Bob.
Thank you. At the annual meeting, the steps taken by Maine, or the commitment made by Maine at that meeting to take the 25 to 40% reduction, was a voluntary step by the state of Maine, and that was part of the negotiation as Addendum 4 wasn't moving as fast as some of the board members had liked, and there was some concern that what was going to happen with the 2014 glass eel fishery in Maine, and that at that point, the state of Maine volunteered to take the reduction between 25 and 40%. So I think this is really just an update on the voluntary action taken by the state of Maine to provide some buffer for this board while they complete the work on Addendum 4. So I don't think any additional action is needed by the board.
So with that clarification, that this motion on the board would give Maine the flexibility to implement this, and certainly the board can expect a full report at our spring meeting. Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to ask Pat, the terminology here is to suspend. Is this for an indefinite period, or is this for a fixed period?
Pat.
Thank you, Doug. No, the motion the motion's on the board. It's a little different than the way I read it, because I did read it as a request for a 2014 conservation equivalency request. So we're anticipating this is for 1 year with the additional changes that will be, should be noted in the new addendum.
So check the board, Doug. I think this addresses your question as well, Paul. Other comments or questions? Seeing none, why don't we have a caucus? And I'll read the motion on the board. Move to allow the state of Maine to suspend the use of input controls currently used, license and gear caps, to manage the glass eel harvest, and move to the use of an output control with buffer and payback provisions as presented today as a 2014 conservation equivalency request. Motion made by Commissioner Kelleher and seconded by Mr. Augustine. Everybody ready? Okay, those who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah. It's unanimous, 19-0-0. Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to the technical committee report. Kate? Paul?
I guess it's still not quite clear to me, what is it in the plan or in this discussion that documents, without a motion, what is it that sets that quota? It seems to me that we need something that incorporates all of the things that the commissioners presented in terms of the compliance measures, the quota for 2014, in order to set the benchmark for 2014. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the agreement is. It doesn't seem well constituted to me.
I'm going to shoot from the hip here and say solely that if the state of Maine comes back without fulfilling a single one of these, we don't expect to have an overfishery. There's a commitment from the state on a voluntary basis to implement all these measures and report back to the board a full implementation of the measures that we've proposed here today. But if you feel that a motion is necessary, I'd be open to one.
I just think in order to institutionalize it, I'd have to go, otherwise we'd be going back to the minutes for me to recall what it is that the commissioner said was going to happen. So I think I trust the voluntary actions of Maine, and I realize that, but I think we need to somehow have the thing documented.
You prepared to make it on the fly, Pat, or do you want to move on to the technical committee and report and draft a motion during that?
I'll make it on the fly. I think I can make it on the fly. The good representative knows I'm good at winging it in front of his committee, so I'll try it here. I would move the acceptance of a 35% reduction from 18,076 pounds to 11,749 pounds. Any overages would be paid back the following year Don't type anymore, Joe. I'm going to think out loud. The payback would be the following year. The payback would be the following year, but after the quota would be set through the addendum process. So we would pay back any overages paid back the following year would be in addition excuse me, back up, Joe, or not Joe, but who's typing over there? Any overages would be paid back the following year would be a reduction set for the 2015 season. Does that capture it?
This is for the 2014 season.
You second, Pat? Paul, does this capture? Are there any board comments to the motion on the board? Doug?
Just to put in 35% reduction in the
from the 2014
from the
2013.
This applies to the 2014 season, and it applies to the state of Maine.
Yeah.
Mike, you might want to reference the 2013 for the 18076. Clear enough for you, Doug?
Yep.
Pat, you okay with that? Double Pats. Are there any, Tom?
Yeah, just for clarity, so let's say that we do go through an addendum process and had that in place for the 2015 season, and the glass eel quota for Maine is less than what was in place for 14. How does that payback provision apply? Will it come off of the new lower quota?
That's my read, yes. But, I mean, to follow Pat's multiple comments here, this is a step-down process here. We're anticipating that Addendum 4 is going to give us something significantly less than where we're at right now. And so whatever that ends up on through the final vote of this board on Addendum 4, the reduction will be from that amount. Are there any final comments? Walter?
Yeah, I just want to say that the way I presented this to the Marine Resources Committee was that if we failed to enact measures to properly manage the 2014 season, that it would be our last Elver season, knowing what the sentiments here were. So I think the legislature got that, or the committee got that, and we understand the seriousness of this process.
Okay, is there a need to caucus? Seeing none, I'm going to read the motion on the board. The motion is to move the acceptance of the 35% reduction from the 2013 harvest of 18,076 pounds to 11,749 pounds for the 2014 season in Maine. Any overages will be paid back the following year with a reduction in the 2015 season. Motion made by Commissioner Kelleher and seconded by Mr. Augustine. Those who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. The motion carries 19-0-0. Thank you. Is there any further business? Paul?
All of this discussion has to do with a directed fishery, and there's some great new compliance measures that the state of Maine is putting in place, but it doesn't seem that we've talked very much about one of the issues that we're all concerned about, and that is the illegal fishing for alvers. And at some point, I would love to see staff put together an archive of the current rules, state by state, that deal with non-compliance fishing or illegal fishing. If there's any proposed legislation, for instance, to increase penalties, what are the penalties? I know that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're going through a legislative process right now that would increase penalties to a very significant level, first offense, that sort of thing. So I'd like to see some kind of appendix of that for us to review.
Great suggestion, Paul. We'll have it included in our spring briefing materials. Is there any further business on Maine's 2014 fishing year? Okay. Kate. Okay, Sheila, you're taking the lead. Thank you.
Can I get the? Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just here to give an update on the technical committee's tasks that were assigned for Addendum 4 that we're going to address in the spring meeting. Just to give the board an update of where we are, the technical committee has met a couple of times to discuss some of the things that we need to address for Addendum 4. One of the first items that we were dealing with was updating indices. We were requested to see if we could update any indices from the 2012 stock assessment in time for this May meeting. And we are able to update the harvest data through 2013. Which might be available to use for quota development. And we will also be able to update the Young of the Year survey through 2013. And although we don't have the results yet, it looks like some states have had very good years, some states have had poor years, and some states are kind of on status quo. So I don't know that that's going to be real conclusive at this point. But we'll have the full results in May when that meeting comes around. And at this time, we will not be doing any updates to the 10, the 20, or the 30-year indices that we used in the stock assessment. We just don't have the resources or the time to do that by the May meeting. So that's the indices. Does anyone have any questions on the indices?
Questions for Sheila? Seeing none?
Okay. We can move on to the review. We were requested to review European and Canadian eel fishery management. And we've taken some preliminary review of how they're managing their fisheries in both Europe and Canada and how that compares to what we have enacted in the ASMFC process, or at least considered. And initially it looks like a lot of the management measures taken in both Europe and Canada are similar to things that we have considered here or enacted here in the U.S. Again, we'll have a full report on that in the May meeting.
Any questions for Sheila? Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My hand went up a little late with the last set of questions, but I'm always interested to find out what the technical committee has in terms of progress on some type of validation with the elvers and other life stages. And each time I ask that question, it grows in maybe some confidence on the part of the technical committee that this is getting closer to having some use within an assessment. And I think the idea here is a lot of states have waited to see the what type of fruit is born from the surveys that have been in place for many years for elvers, and want to see how that is used and that it is used. And I'm wondering what the prognosis is lately.
Sheila? Or Kate?
I think with the Young of the Year surveys that the information hasn't been terribly conclusive. There's not an increasing or decreasing trend there, so I don't know that there's much more information to gain from that. And even with the updates of the past couple of years, it's really not showing anything, a marked change anyway. I don't know that I can answer your question any further than that. Okay.
Paul?
Yes, as far as the review of European and Canadian eel fisheries management methods, I imagine that for some details they are similar, but the stark difference that I would think is what's driving the glass eel economy here in the United States, and that is that Europe has banned the exports of glass eel. So in this review, I'd like to see some of the impacts, associated impacts with that measure in Europe, and I'd like a clear demonstration of the shifts of the pressure in the markets that have come here to the U.S. And most importantly, I'd like to see some type of legal review that maybe our director might need our attorney to do to explore whether or not the Commission has the authority to prohibit exports of glass eels from the U.S.
Paul, Marty might have part of an answer to your question.
Hey, Paul, the reason now what's going on in Europe is that about 40% of the eel farms are going out of business because of the amount of glasses they have caught and they put into the plants. They brought so much eels on the market now that the prices tumbled to next to nothing. We're going to have a big problem with that with wild eels this spring for price factors. Because the glasses that were not exported has all come into the actual farms up in Europe. And they've grown way, way too many eels right now. And that's what the result is of not exporting them to China. And China did get 60 tons of European glass eels, however they did it.
And I guess that's the kind of report that's the type of information that could be incorporated into the TC's report.
Okay. We can work on that.
Other questions for Sheila?
I have one more. One more slide.
You've got one more?
Yep. All right. And the final thing is the life cycle survey that we were tasked to try to develop. We have assessed the surveys that are currently in place that we were aware of with the technical committee, and there's not currently a survey that would really constitute a life cycle survey that's being done in the U.S. There's different surveys for yellow eels or glass eels or even silver eels that are done. It could maybe be used as part of a life cycle survey, but we really would have to add more to that to have a full, complete life cycle survey. There's some complications in conducting a life cycle survey, especially in big river systems. I think one of the biggest limitations is trying to collect collect silver eels in a big system. It's very difficult to do that in a timely fashion. So we're going to work on some methodology and a sampling framework, and we'll be able to present that again at the May meeting.
Questions for Sheila? Russ?
Not really a question, but I just wanted to let you guys know that New Jersey is attempting to do some life cycle surveys on the river systems where we already have glass eel data. So we will be beginning to do some yellow eel work this summer and then move that into the silver eel migration and hopefully get some information and do this for a few years and hopefully get some information for this board. Thank you.
Rob?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on the same subject as before. It would be very beneficial to Virginia to know the merits or the cost benefit of continuing with the Elver surveys. Budgets are not what they used to be, as everyone knows, and it's something that after 13 or 14 years, I suspect there's a lot of interannual variability in this data. They don't seem to be useful in the assessment process after all this time, and there's a standing technical committee recommendation, not to increase harvest at any life stage, but at the same time, there's really not very good information on the utility of these data in areas where there is not any type of fishery on that particular life stage going on. So I would hope that the technical committee could come back at some point and reassure the states that these compliance elements, which is what they are valuable in some respect, other than just to get an idea that there's really not much there, the trend isn't there, they seem to be up, they seem to be down. In this day and time, there has to be a cost-benefit approach to this, and that's what I'm asking.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila, I want to build a little bit on what Lance Stewart brought up at the meeting in Georgia, which is this concept of recognizing different river systems or drainages, coastal drainages, and how each drainage is very different when it comes to American eel and the life cycle. In Maine, we have many drainages that in the spring attract large quantities of glass eels, but we know there's very little to no yellow eels within that system just because of the amount of habitat that's above it. Is this something that the technical committee has looked at or could look at as far as looking at habitat type or the size of a drainage to rank them to the importance of eels? It may be a way to focus glass eel harvest into drainages that don't have tremendous benefit to the overall population.
I think that we recognize that every watershed is different, and with the life cycle survey, this has been a large component of the discussion, is that evaluating a big river system such as the Potomac River compared to a small coastal river system that has very little habitat, it means a very different thing for eel survival and production. So something that we're considering with the survey at this point.
Are there any further questions for Sheila? Okay. Seeing none, we're moving on to our next agenda item, the American Eel Farm Aquaculture request. Kate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American Eel Farm has submitted a request to the chairman for a glass eel allocation. The chairman has requested the technical committee review the proposal. The proposal is for 750 pounds of glass eels from the state of North Carolina. The American Eel Farm plans to grow out the glass eels to market size to 9 inches, and it's expected that this can be accomplished in about 190 days, with the estimated production to be around 110,000 pounds per year. This would constitute upwards of 800,000 juvenile eels, and their expected timeline for harvest would be that 1/3 could be harvested within the first 5 months, the second could be harvested within 7 months, and the remainder harvested within 10 months from the facility. Within the proposal that was presented, they had suggestions that they would be reporting harvest of their catches that would be allowed, and also express their willingness for restocking of any eels into the rivers, as well as any other requirements that would be stipulated under the permit by the state of North Carolina. The technical committee did review this request, and I will allow the technical committee chair to review their comments.
So as Kate said, we did review the request from the American Eel Farm, and the technical committee really felt that the level of harvest that was being requested in that proposal was at a level similar to current elver fishery or glass eel fishery in South Carolina, so we really looked at it as a new fishery. And because we were looking at it as a new fishery, the technical committee really is in opposition of that. It's against what the stock assessment recommended from 2012. So at this point, the technical committee does not support the new fishery or the level of harvest that's being requested by the American Eel Farm at this time. The proposal that was given to us did not have scientific information for us to evaluate as far as the merit goes for the information it would provide to us to use in a potential future stock assessment. And the question came to us, what kind of information, if a scientific collection permit were to be granted, would we like to see as a technical committee to be put into that permit as a requirement? And so these are some things that the technical committee thought that would be useful information to be collected if a permit were granted by the board or by the state. We would definitely like this proposal to be involved in the life cycle survey once that gets developed by the technical committee, either completing the entire life cycle survey or at least participating in a component of that survey to get more and additional information to support that survey. At the very least, we'd like to see collection of catch and effort data by location and any environmental data that would be associated with that harvest. And we would also like to see some harvest restrictions put in place that might include some non-fishing days or cap the total amount of harvest that could come from a particular river system, or having gear restrictions or even partial releases or restocking. And any restocking that would happen, particularly if it was for an aquaculture adventure and those eels were held in a facility, the technical committee would like to review any stocking proposal that would come out of that. We have some concerns about stocking fish that have been held in a facility.
Thank you, Sheila.
Just a little bit more. We do have some other considerations. There was some concern that the impacts with additional glass eel harvest might impact current yellow eel fisheries, and so some socioeconomic impact should be considered when granting any collection permit, especially of this size. And we're also getting similar requests. I've gotten requests myself of folks wanting to do scientific collection for this reason, some for aquaculture, some just to find glass eels in different places along the coast. And so the decision by the board made on this today will actually impact other requests that might come up in the future. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Questions, comments? Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. First of all, I don't know if it's a money issue or why the aquaculture grow-out couldn't buy these eels from the areas that are still harvesting them. It might be that the price is too high, low, whatever. That's one thing, but I didn't know why you couldn't buy the 750 from one of the other ones. The other one I am concerned about is the fact that if this gets approved, just as she said, we're going to have the other states line up to do the same. That would be my concern here.
I'm going to stay at the board. Board comments, Lewis.
Yeah, I don't know how you want to handle this, but I think maybe providing you some background on the request and at the same time addressing some of the technical committee's concerns may be a way forward. And then questions, Mr. Chairman, if that suits you.
Yeah, you know, if you can provide an overview here, and then we'll build off of that.
Yeah, let me just refresh everyone's memory as to the annual meeting. This request came from me for the American Eel Farm. There were some discrepancies, I guess, for lack of a better term, in the request on how large the eels would be and whether or not the facility had the capacity or the capability to raise these up to our legal size limit of 9 inches. Soon after the Georgia meeting, Mr. Allen contacted me. He's contacted several experts around the world and has provided quite detailed information on his new understanding on the capacity of his facility, and indicated then to me that he could now raise these eels up to the minimum size, at least, and have them and be able to offer those for sale. So I did not feel comfortable as the chairman of the commission restating the request, and so I talked with the chairman of the board and asked if he would accept the request from the American Eel Farm, and he agreed with the stipulation that it would be run through the technical committee, and they have given it their review. So Mr. Dick Stone, who many of you know as a retired National Marine Fisheries Service, has contracted, is a contractor for Mr. Allen, and he has some statements that he would like to make on behalf of the petition for inclusion. So my primary feeling on this is that one of the reasons, perhaps not the only reason, but one of the reasons that the request was voted down in Georgia was because of the appearance that it was really a ruse for an elver fishery. And I think many of the folks around the table spoke to that effect. I think the record's pretty clear that that was a major concern. Whether additional concerns exist, we'll hear in a few minutes. But my comfort level with at least the ability to now raise the eels up to a legal size resolved one of the major conflicting factors in the decision in Georgia. So now the question comes up, well, what if everybody jumps in line to do the same thing? Well, that was not my concern. What I'm asking for, what we were asking for, was the authority to grant a scientific collecting permit. I have absolutely no problem with any and all of the suggestions from the technical committee in terms of what would be included in that scientific collecting permit to see if this operation would work. But it's a one-year request. That was my intent. With any future allocations of glass eels having to come through the addendum, the upcoming addendum. And so if we decide there's not going to be any glass eel fishing, or it's going to be reduced to such a level that North Carolina, and everybody gets a 50-pound quota, I mean, what South Carolina is getting ready to go down to 70 pounds, then our quota will be what our quota will be. But I want to make it absolutely clear that I in no way, shape, or form intended for this to take away from my existing traditional yellow eel fishery. And that I know we've had a lot of discussion about some kind of conversion factor of yellow eels to glass eels and that kind of thing. We may or may not ever get there. But if we do head in that direction to where, and I think I'm speaking for all the states, if we're going to do any conversion of a traditional yellow eel catch to a new glass eel fishery, that's going to have full discussion at the public, in public comments and meetings to give the traditional eel fishermen an opportunity to comment. So that's sort of where we are, and I can't speak to the technical aspects of the farm itself, and I believe there are folks here that could if there are questions, but if it would be satisfactory, Mr. Chairman, if we could allow Mr. Stone, maybe I think he's got a statement that he would like to make on behalf of the American Eel Farm, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure they would, on the request.
Thank you, Louis. Before we go to Mr. Stone, I want to look to the board. And are there any questions to Sheila on the technical committee's report? Paul.
Yeah, I guess the type of the type of thing that I'd be looking for here is to have a better understanding of the public benefits from moving towards this type of development. And for instance, I heard that there'd be a willingness to do some stocking at some point. And from all of our earlier discussions about glass eel harvest, I'm told that natural mortality is quite high, something on the order of 90%. And so if a production facility like this took 750 pounds, are we still talking about that range, which is, I guess, a few million glass eels or so. And if the science suggests that only 150,000 of those reach an older age, and this program was willing to reduce that mortality to such a degree that they can stock out 300,000 at that age, then this is a benefit that you end up putting eels into production without reducing the wild population. In fact, you may even enhance it. So that's the kind of technical analysis and information that would be valuable to me in being able to make a proper decision.
Sheila.
Thank you. Yes, we had some considerations with restocking. Two things in particular came up with that, with the technical committee discussion. One is the potential for introducing disease that might be spread in an aquaculture facility back into the wild. Some states have regulations on disease spread and taking aquaculture fish and putting them back out. The second thing that we've found with some work that we're doing right now in the Susquehanna River is that putting eels in at very high densities alters the sex ratio, and that's of major concern. If you're going to stock a whole bunch of eels and they're going to be males, and they're only going to grow to 300 millimeters and then leave, that's not necessarily what you're looking for in those systems either. So it's going to alter the life history of those fish when you restock them back into the system. And one other thing I wanted to point out with the North Carolina request in particular is that the Young of the Year survey has not been completed in that state for some years now, and so the request of 750 pounds, we don't have any survey to really gauge that by how much that really is for that particular watershed or even within the state. So that's another concern of the technical committee.
Staying with questions. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, I think I got Herbie Drake for the microphone. I'd like to ask the staff a question. This is the first time I've served on the eel board in a long time, so I'm a little bit out of the loop on the process. Are there specific provisions of the plan that control how state agencies issue scientific collectors permits? Kate?
No, this isn't aquaculture harvest or scientific collection permits is not within detailed within the plan. However, given that the harvest is for commercial purposes, the state of North Carolina requested review and to go through the board at the annual meeting, and so this is a continuation of that.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess I just make the observation that I think there's going to be a lot of additional interest in this. I think, as Paul Diodati just said, I think there's some intriguing aspects of this that actually could be beneficial if we construct it that way. And I think that the plan, at some point, we should talk about developing specific criteria on this issue and including those in a plan so that we don't just do this ad hoc.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Lewis, if he said it was for 1 year, I know that they are requesting this as a per year. I don't think a 1 year thing would be beneficial to the company because then they have to come back the next year to see if they can get it again. So maybe Lewis could explain. They want it every year. I'm not against this necessarily, but I just have these questions on this thing. Thank you.
Lewis.
Well, my understanding and is that from the discussions that we had before the annual meeting was that this would be for this upcoming season. The reason that the request came in was so that they could get jump started. They've got the facility, it's up and running, it's ready to go. They're ready to put the eels in the facility, but yet there was no mechanism to do that until Addendum 4 is approved. So my understanding, and I think many of the board's understanding, is that once Addendum 4 is adopted, it will address this issue. And whatever the quota might be and however that allocation would be handled through Addendum 4, not through this specific scientific collecting permit request. And Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question or basically clarify a question from the technical committee?
Please.
You're right, the BridgeNet survey, which is North Carolina's primary survey to collect elvers and provide information on elver abundance, has been in limbo for the last several years. We have secured the funding to get those samples sorted and try to get that information. But one of the interesting factors of this is to find out just that information. I have very capable staff that has made efforts to collect glass eels through a glass eel survey, and we've not been real successful. And so my hope is that if we had those folks out looking as hard as folks would be looking, we might be able to find out exactly where those eels are in our area of jurisdiction. And while I got the mic, I do want to introduce Gordon Myers is here. He's from the Wildlife Resources Commission. He's their executive director, and his jurisdiction is in the inland waters where a lot of these elvers would be fishing, and there would be no fishing allowed in those inland waters under this permit. So it's all coastal waters, most of which are dead-end systems. And so I'm not really sure yet what the impacts of this harvest would be, but I want to make sure the technical committee is aware that we're very interested in trying to find these things and provide as much of a life history study, life stage study as we possibly can. And this was just sort of our first stab at trying to find that information.
Okay, before we go to Mr. Stone and discuss the merits of this request, are there any further questions for Sheila? John.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious whether the technical committee got any economic data on this proposal. All I've seen is that they're planning to take 750 pounds of glass eels, turn them into 9-inch eels, but that seems like taking a very valuable input and turn it into something that's not very valuable. How does this pay for itself? Thanks.
There is an economic part of the proposal. We did not review that as a technical committee. We looked at the scientific merit of that proposal only.
Question, Marty?
Yes, just a verification. On the AP Commission, we have talked to some of the fishermen right now in North Carolina, and they think it's pretty unfair that everything goes through public comment, and they have to abide by all the rules and get knocked down for everything that's possible that we all have been deciding over here, and yet somebody else can just walk through the back door and say, well, we'll take part of the livelihood away. They don't get no benefit at all. The people that work every day in the fishery there have no benefit of this deal at all. So I think if it should be done, it should be done through public comment, that everybody else can decide what is going to happen, and then get a say. If it goes to public comment and they agree, they should have that permit. I'm not against aquaculture. It's 75% of my business. So, thank you.
Okay, question, Pat, because we're segueing into...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila, thank you for the report. You did list what the group would have to do and provide you in order to be considered to have this aquaculture facility up and running. Would you consider the likelihood of they developing a protocol with you to do that, that there might be a likelihood that they would be allowed to run that facility? I'm not talking about where the eels are coming from. I'm talking about the protocol that you put up there that was lacking in the document that we received to make an assessment of. I mean, you talked about protocol for life cycle and the rest of that sort of thing. The likelihood that they could develop with the technical committee the protocol to do that, would that seem reasonable if they were to buy the eels?
Sheila?
If they were to buy the eels, that they could complete the life cycle survey?
Yes. No, the part of their total process. Yeah, it's a total process. In other words, I understand that they want to buy glass eels to start the process, but somewhere along the line, when I talked to Mr. Allen, he had talked about the possibility of doing some of this. And then all of a sudden the dollar signs came up in everybody's eyes because we were going to produce 90 to 95% of the albers are going to grow out to 6 to 9 inches, and they're going to have 110,000 pounds of food, and they're going to produce these eels for the market. So it just went from some research, again, the permit, that there was going to be a possibility of putting some back in for rebuilding the stock. But that all got lost. And everybody, I think I know, in my case, I looked at it from a standpoint of it's aquaculture. If it will work, whether it's eels or whatever it happens to be, is it doable and does it make sense? If I put in perspective the facility itself, it's a gorgeous facility. Maybe it should be growing tilapia. I don't know. But if it's set up for growing eels, if they developed a protocol with you, they could prove that there would be some research value to this and life cycle for down there in that area. Is that doable? If it's not doable, I think we really have to know that no matter what they do, it's not doable, and I think that would end it. I want to get as black and white on that as I can, because this group is hanging out there waiting for us to make some kind of decision. And on one hand, it appears we've led them a little bit because aquaculture would be good. On the other hand, they've led us a little bit because they've been very aggressive in pushing this on us. So I'd almost like to get a black and white answer on that.
Do you have a quick answer, Sheila, or is that something that we can wrap into our discussion?
I think that we could work with them to collect some scientific information that might be useful. Right.
Thank you for that, and I hope Mr. Stone will take that comment when he makes his pitch. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Stone, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to come back to the board. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Eel Board members. First, I do want to reiterate what we're trying to... The mic on?
I need your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dick Stone, and I'm here to present this particular request for the state of North Carolina and the American Eel Farm. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to support the North Carolina request for a permit to use controlled harvest of up to 750 pounds of glass eels in North Carolina coastal waters. These glass eels would be used to grow out at a state-of-the-art aquaculture facility located in Trenton, North Carolina, as part of an effort to establish a viable eel aquaculture facility in the U.S. and to better understand our North Carolina glass eel population and the eel life cycle. This operation would be conducted under a North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries Scientific and Educational Collection Permit. The permit conditions would include timely harvest reporting, timing of the glass eel migration, catch per unit of effort, and the potential for translocation of a portion of the glass eels upstream of impediments in the river system where they are collected to enhance future yellow silver eel populations. Using the practice of translocation and restocking that is used extensively in Europe, here in North Carolina, should reduce the component of natural mortality that you've talked about, that is very high for glass eels, and eliminate any potential problem of sex differential with glass eels grown out in high densities and then released. Also, this harvest could provide the North Carolina part of the glass eel monitoring the ASMFC would like to see from each state. It is exciting to think about the potential of a domestic eel farm using local catch to supply local markets, and in the future, processed local product to fill domestic ethnic market needs that now require imported product. This is a very large business worldwide, and I believe as the NOAA Aquaculture Mission states, it's important to encourage this type of initiative and job creation in a sound, scientifically supportable manner. And speaking of science, we would envision multiple sampling sites initially in North Carolina river basins, and then, if this is allowed to continue as a scientific investigation, after 2 years selecting 2 sites with abundant glass eel populations for static sampling locations to fulfill the state requirement to monitor glass eel and elver young of the year life stages. This will be a good opportunity to assess in North Carolina the annual recruitment of each year's cohort, which is unknown. As the eel management plan states, data from a young of the year abundance survey could provide a barometer with which to gauge the efficiency of management actions. As you and the board know from the letter and attachment I sent, there should be no question about the capability of the American Eel Farm to do the job. The facility and equipment within it is state-of-the-art and a facility that can grow out eels to market size. This domestic operation gives us an opportunity to conduct needed data collection and limited harvest in a highly monitored and verifiable setting while providing needed jobs in Jones County, North Carolina. I believe it is important to encourage this type of initiative and job creation in a sound, scientifically supported manner. We envision this as a 5-year scientific study, but obviously, as Lewis has said, we would get permission for 1 year to start with. Our sampling data collection protocol will be developed with Gary Wright, the North Carolina representative on the Eel Board's technical committee, and the technical committee itself. We can meet all those conditions posed by the technical committee, and would love to try to do that. Mike Frisco, a North Carolina State University area aquaculture agent, and other scientists and students would be working with us on the production side of the American Eel Farm. I don't see that there would be any economic impact on other fisheries from the work that we want to do. As a matter of fact, if we do get to move some of these glass eels upstream, there probably would be more yellow eels for the fishermen in North Carolina to harvest. I, Louis Daniel, Rick Allen, and our expert on fish farm operation from Denmark, David Omani, look forward to discussing this with you. We'll be happy to answer any questions anyone may have on this request, and hope they can have a favorable review during this meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dennis, then Richie, and Pat, and then let's consider the merits of this request, and we're running late on time. We still have more action to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your patience in dealing with this issue. A question for Sheila, very simple from a layman like myself. What scientific information would you get from taking a glass eel that is this big, a couple inches long, to growing it to 9 inches in an aquarium tank and then selling it some months later? I fail to see the true scientific value in such an endeavor. Am I wrong or right in my thoughts?
I think the information that we would be interested in is the information in actually collecting the glass eels before they get into the facility. Once they're in the facility, I don't know that there's much that is useful for the technical committee as far as management goes.
Thank you. That's what I wanted you to say.
Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a motion that's not directly to this application, but if it passes, may frame how we go forward on this application. Move to include the following in draft addendum 4. Define the criteria to issue a state scientific permit for all life stages. Define the maximum amount of eels that could be harvested and sold under a scientific permit without board approval. And define the minimum amount of eel that could be harvested or sold under a scientific permit with board approval. And if I get a second, I'd like to speak to it.
Second by David Borden.
First off, this is a Pat Augustine motion because I had this concept and Tony put the wordsmith it. So thanks for the assistance, Pat. In looking at this, and reading and looking at this application, and hearing the technical committee's report, it's clear to me that this 750 pounds is going to be harvested, and there's not scientific information being produced that the technical committee is in favor of. So I think instead of dealing with these on a one-by-one basis, let's get a policy in place so that any application that comes in can be treated equally at the same time and the same set of regulations. So, thank you.
Comments on the motion on the board. Pat.
Yeah, I think I can support the motion. I was having a lot of time just kind of thinking through the process of using a scientific collection permit for the use of for a collection for an aquaculture, a commercial aquaculture venture, and that's really where I was having my problems. I'm supportive of the overall process. We've been approached in the state of Maine for similar type of work, but my angst, again, lies with scientific collection permits for the use of a commercial venture, and I think at least this motion starts to frame a little bit better for the states how a state could move forward and at what level before we start to get into issues. And I think, to Sheila's point, the issues of science associated with an aquaculture facility, they're just not there in my mind. My biggest concern with this facility is the biosecurity issues that were raised by the technical committee. So,
Rob, you had your hand up?
It's not confluent with this motion. It was a question about what Mr. Stone presented.
Let's stay with the motion for the time being. Paul?
I guess I wasn't prepared for this motion, but it seems to me, does this suggest that it short circuits the ability of this board to deal with this request? Is that what this does? Are we going to be able to deal with this request today, or does this motion suggest that it'll be delayed until addendum 4 is established with the criteria for this?
I mean, my sense is we could do either, but I'd ask the maker of the motion of his intent.
The intent is not to require this application to come under this, but I think if this passes, I would certainly encourage us to then have this application wait until we figure, these out to see if it falls within the technical committee's recommendation.
Paul?
Well, I would support this motion, but I felt that we're dealing with a specific agenda item. I still have questions about that. I'd like to respond to some of the things that we've talked about in terms of benefits from scientific research, the biohazards that might be associated with this particular project. So it seems to me that this motion is kind of in the way of that. So I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity. If we want to deal with this motion, Mr. Chairman, that's great, but I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to still deal with the business that was in front of us.
Process point, Dennis?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recognizing Paul's angst, I think that if you care to, you could make a motion to indefinitely postpone to time definite, it could be an hour or two, or just table this temporarily while you deal with your subject. But as we stand right now, this is in the hands of the chairman and to be dealt with as long as it's there on the board, huh?
What's your pleasure, Paul?
I'd be glad, this isn't my issue, but I'd be glad to make a motion to postpone until we deal with the agenda item, until we complete our business with the agenda item that was in front of us before the motion was made. So that might be however long it takes.
Are you seconding that, Rob?
Also, I'd like to add that I'm just a little concerned about the motion with the scientific permit. I mean, typically, I don't know how other states have these, but scientific collection permits are not for commercial purposes. This is a venture, and I assumed that this proposal was more geared to look at science in terms of what the facility does, how it grows out the eels, those types of aspects, where we should be looking at the eel component here more than anything else, not on any sale or commercial part of it with a scientific permit.
Okay, the motion to table is not debatable, so let's move the motion. Those support the motion to table until a decision is made on the aquaculture proposal from North Carolina, made by Mr. Diodati and seconded by Mr. O'Reilly. Those support the motion on the board, please indicate so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Motion carries 19-0-0. This motion is tabled. Lewis, back to the North Carolina.
Yeah, let's get the discussion going here. I'll make a motion that we accept the American Eel Farm request and that all of the provisions requested by the technical committee for the SECP be included in the permit requirements, and that it be for the 2014 season.
Motion made by Mr. Daniels. Is there a second? Second by Lauren. Board debate. Paul.
On the scientific merits of the proposal, we've talked a little bit about that, and it's my feeling that if a project like this, there's a lot of reasons why we do these kinds of jobs, and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have several where we do shad and rainbow smelt in a very similar fashion. But one of the merits is that you might be able to get a food product locally without transportation costs involved. Making it environmentally friendly in terms of the carbon footprint. There's the food safety issue that I think is important to this country these days, and so developing aquaculture is a priority for the nation. But the most important thing to me in terms of the eel populations is that if a project like this can move forward and demonstrate that it could be done so without any net loss to natural populations is critical to me. And now translocating these fish could be problematic, but in my view, that's a critical part of this, if you want to call it, experiment. I know the technical committee has raised issues about that, as did the commissioner from Maine, and I share those concerns. If disease or genetic mixing becomes a problem, we need to know that. But if this is done in Europe and other places of the world, and if we could do that, then, and if we can demonstrate how many larger eels need to be transported and restocked in order to get a no net loss to the population, I think that's extremely valuable. You can essentially have created a fishery, a grow-out, and a restocking that has no net loss to the population, and there's benefits, to the public and to the company that's involved. In fact, I would like to see that kind of operation in my state, if that works. So those are the kind of measurements that I'd like to see in terms of the science part of this. Could that actually be accomplished? And could it be accomplished with enough profit to be viable? So if those measures could be built in, then I would view this as an important science experiment, and I would support the motion.
Other comments from the board? Dave?
Yeah, well, I appreciate all the effort that's gone into this. It's plain and simply, if we do this, we're opening the floodgate to every individual in every state using this workaround to quota-based management and management in general. We have an addendum where we're going to consider potentially glass eel fisheries, how we're going to manage eel fisheries state to state, whether we may allow glass eel fisheries in other states than Maine and South Carolina, and it should simply wait for that time. To call this, research and scientific collection, and it would be precedent-setting to my experience that someone would ask for what might be $1.5 million worth of product to conduct research. As Rob alluded to, Connecticut could not issue a scientific collector's permit for such an activity. It simply isn't. The motivation isn't science. The motivation is profit. And I just think this activity, like all of our other activities, needs to wait until we have an addendum, and it falls under the normal flow of commission business to manage fisheries.
Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I obviously don't like this motion and am tempted to modify the motion to a motion that would allow all states to conduct the same operation as suggested by the state of North Carolina. Their aquaculture operation it is taking 6% of what the state of Maine harvests. And if each state had one proposal and was taking 6%, 750 pounds, we'd be up to harvesting about the same as the state of Maine would. And we have two real issues here. I don't think anyone debates or has problems with the aquaculture portion of it. I think the real issue is about using a scientific go-around to harvest 750 pounds of eels, which the technical committee says is something that we shouldn't be doing. So I cannot support this motion. Thank you.
Rob?
I just think the timing is wrong. and I know a lot of effort has been put into this, and that's without a doubt. I think that ventures do occur. One occurred in Virginia about 15 years ago. It didn't work out. It was a little bit different in terms of the expected life stage that would be marketed. This might be a little more solid, obviously, in its goals, but here we have Maine talking about a 35% reduction from 2013 harvest and a step down from that, which would be added on to whatever the technical committee and the board give as a final amount. And here we have, I guess I heard that South Carolina will have a lowering as well. And I haven't heard anyone mention that we're still waiting to hear the fate of this species in terms of what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decides, and that's coming up, keeps getting closer, and I just think that it sort of goes against everything that we're trying to do based on what went through 2010 with our assessment, the advice of the technical committee, and has there really been great improvement since 2010? I haven't heard that. So I think I also share the idea that on an aquaculture basis, that's fine, but on the overriding species and stock status question, it's not. And yesterday in the executive committee, we talked a little bit, as Lewis had mentioned, about certain aspects as we go forward, but what we also probably should have talked about a little bit more was this designation that came around later on in the policy board, where we looked now at overfished, possibly be determined as depleted. I was very uncomfortable originally knowing that with the eel assessment, what we were left with was depleted. We didn't have a biological reference point that we're all used to with other fish species, but now I see that maybe depleted is a lot stronger than I had originally thought, and that is the case with the eel stocks. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am going to speak in opposition to the motion. A couple reasons. One, I was hesitant to even bring up, but Mr. O'Reilly just brought it up, and that is the ESA listing that is currently under deliberation in my agency. That alone would cause me, as a Fish and Wildlife Service rep, to essentially be unable to support increased harvest. But more importantly, I come from an agency that has a long history of hatchery-based stocking restoration efforts. Unfortunately, the list of shiny success stories is much shorter. And so when I see that stocking from this effort is thrown up to mitigate or offset the additional harvest, or trap and truck, or these sorts of measures that again, there's a long history of how these work in terms of restoration, or how they don't work. To me, it doesn't make sense to use that to create a problem, increase harvest, and then say you're going to fix it with a remedy that we know is inferior and doesn't work. The much simpler solution is don't create the problem in the first place. Don't let the increased harvest occur. Thank you.
Anybody else from the board wish to speak? Lewis.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion, and you all have heard the issue now 2 meetings. I just want to make sure it's clear that the scientific collection permit was really the only avenue I had to move forward with for this request. And I understand the angst and concern from some over that. We have had situations in the past where we have done scientific collecting permits that generated a lot of fish, and we had to have some mechanism to be able to dispose of those fish. And so there are certain circumstances where we do allow folks to sell their product. So, and I agree with Rob's comment that really, and Sheila's, that really the primary data for stock status and stock assessment is what happens prior to the eels going into the facility. There's a lot of interest, though, in North Carolina through North Carolina State University primarily and others on the science of aquaculture. So while that doesn't fit into the stock status and the stock assessment, it is considered one of our sciences that we are interested in and promote.
Is there anybody else from the board that wishes to speak to the motion on the board? Seeing none, we're running late. I'm not going to go back out to the audience, so board, please caucus. Okay, board members. Board members. Move to accept the American Eel Farm request and that all the provisions requested by the TC be included in the permit requirements for the 2014 season. Motion made by Dr. Daniel and seconded by Mr. Lestwick. Those board members who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. And those that are opposed. And any abstentions? Any recusals?
Yeah, but no vote.
Oh, you had a no? Okay, the motion fails 1-17-0-1. We've got a motion tabled. Dennis.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to remove the previous motion from the table that Richie White offered.
Is there an objection to removing the tabled motion? Seeing none, the motion's back on the table. Is there further board discussion? Dave.
Yeah, I think this now is a good question. It didn't seem necessary 6 months ago or so, but I do think it's a more general question that goes beyond the eel board. So I think it's something that should be dealt with more generically at the policy board level.
Lewis.
Dave took the words out of my mouth. This is a great idea. It would be very helpful for the states to have this ability to be able to know where is the threshold that you don't have to come to the board and the threshold where you do. So I agree. I think this is an excellent motion, but I'd like to see it universal for all of our plans, and maybe that's a really good effort that we can pursue over the next year.
Further board discussion. Doug.
I think the process would be appropriate to go through the policy board, although I think it's if we approve the general concepts of this, we still would have to come back to each board to determine the specific maximum amounts of a species that would be appropriate for this. Clearly, there's things within this specific motion that are species-specific and would be different for each species. So, again, I agree with the process of going to the policy board to see if we want to move forward with something like that. And clearly, if we do that, it probably would delay implementation of Addendum 4, or we would not be including it in Addendum 4. We'd have to do it in a separate addendum.
Rob.
So if this would conclude with something going through the policy board, and then there was a ASMFC guidance to the states about this, that might be something that could be looked at in Virginia. But Virginia has a law that guides scientific collection permits, and they definitely don't have anything about commercial enterprise in that law, so that it, I'm not discouraging this type of approach. I'm just saying it would be, might have to be a legislative situation, not only in Virginia, but other states as well.
Paul?
Yeah. I could approve this motion today because I think there's a pressing need for us to address this with American eels. On the other hand, I understand that this would be of tremendous value to give guidance to all of us in terms of dealing with our other plans, but I suspect if it gets to the policy board, we would ask our Management and Science Committee to take a look at it and probably craft the type of measure that we'd want more generically. And so that's how I'd like to see it go, deal with this today and get our Management and Science Committee to look at this for us. So I don't know if we could do that here or in the policy board, but...
Bob?
Just, talking about the timing, if nothing else, we've got a little bit of a timing problem. The policy board's already met, but I think, the reality is this is a coast-wide board. It's the same people that sit on the policy board. And if this group feels that asking the Management and Science Committee to take this on and report back to the policy board on general guidelines and thoughts and, moving forward with a scientific permit guidance, that can be applied to individual FMPs, I think that's a reasonable request for the Management Science Committee and Policy Board. And I can, I don't want to speak for the chair, Louis Daniel, or Doug Grout, the vice chair, but I think, I can work with them between now and the May meeting and, make sure they're comfortable with that moving forward.
Board comfortable with this approach? Pat, you had your hand up. Is there any further discussion on the motion on the board? Richie?
I agree with the direction this is going. Just quickly to address Rob's concern, a state can always be more conservative. So if this was passed, it doesn't mean a state would have to allow the selling under a scientific permit.
Can I say one thing about the European?
Marty?
Yeah, just to give you an update on the European glass eel, they caught 16 pounds last year in one river, and this year they caught 3,000 pounds in the same river, or 3,000 kilos in the same river, and they caught a full quota of 30,000 pounds in 4 days. That's the update of the elver situation in Europe right now. Yeah.
Is there any further discussion on the motion on the board? Seeing none, I'll read it. You're good, Joe? Okay, caucus? Okay, board, to the motion of the board, those who support it, please indicate so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Motion's unanimous, carries 19-000. Is there any further business on this issue? Is there any other business to come before the board? I do have one. I'd like to represent a representative from the Penobscot Nation, John Banks. I would like to speak to the board for just a few minutes, please. We're running way over time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment today. I will be very brief. This is my first foray into the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and I'm just starting to understand the process, so I appreciate your forbearance. My name is John Banks. I'm the Natural Resources Director and a member of the Penobscot Indian Nation in Maine. My tribe has inhabited the area of the Penobscot watershed, we say since time immemorial, but the archaeologists tell us that it's only been 10,000 years. The Penobscot watershed is Maine's largest watershed, and we've been the stewards of that watershed for a very, very long time. We've imposed many conservation measures throughout that long period of time and continue that up until today. We intervene in all of the FERC relicensing procedures, and we have recently completed a major river restoration project that involved the removal of the 2 lowest main stem dams in the Penobscot River watershed. As Commissioner Kelleher mentioned, we are a sovereign nation. I'm not an attorney, but our attorneys tell us that we do have what's referred to as reserved treaty fishing rights within our traditional territory. And we have voluntarily worked cooperatively with the state of Maine in the various legislation dealing with the alver harvesting. Through that process, we're asking for a reasonable level of harvest, and we are proposing additional conservation measures. We're working with the state voluntarily, mainly for 2 reasons. One, I like Pat Kelleher. I enjoy working with him, and I think we share a similar conservation ethic with the state of Maine. The second reason we're choosing to work voluntarily with the state of Maine on alver management is that we don't like to spend a lot of attorney's fees if it's not necessary. When you get into these legal battles about fishing rights and so forth, it can be very expensive, and we don't like to spend our scarce resources on legal fights if it's not necessary. So with that, I just also wanted to add that I'm very pleased that this commission is moving toward a life cycle survey as recommended by the technical committee. As I mentioned earlier, we get involved in all of the FERC hydro relicensing proceedings, and we're very aware of the tremendous impact that these hydroelectric dams have on the various life stages of the American eel. So with that, again, I thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further business to come before the board? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.